fait, ce sera un sujet costaud ou des sujets costauds, mais un universitaire français spécialiste de l'histoire des idées en Amérique et notamment de la French Theory. François Cusset qui est ici pour des conférences universitaires. Bonjour.
Queer theory hates definitions, so it's very ill-defined, very hard to define. It was born as a reaction to gay studies, gay and lesbian studies, which had been pretty strong in the American university system for at least 10 or 20 years, and a little too identity-oriented, as if, looking for examples of gay activism, of gay literature, of gay art. And the idea of queer theory is to generalize a sort of gay trouble, a gender trouble, and look for anything that blurs the border, the boundary between homo and hetero, between gay and straight. For example, in literature, and that's what I'm doing with this book, is to look for gayish attitudes or sexual uncertainty or gender trouble in characters of novel that look obviously very straight, or in authors or plots that cannot be suspected of any form of gayness. So it's basically generalizing this suspicion, this sort of gender suspicion, as well as exploring the stakes, the political and moral stakes of this suspicion, which is that gayness in the economy, in culture, in politics, sort of blur here again all the existing order and pose a real threat to power in place. So that's what queerness is, and that's why queer has been changed into a verb, which is, I queer literature, you can queer, French diplomacy, and why not queering Canadian radio, which means looking for anything that does not fit existing categories in a given environment. That's how I would define it. Well, obviously it was born in North America. I mean, in British English, queer does not mean gay, but means odd, strange, dodgy, So yes, it is definitely a term coined here. The exact sort of intellectuals behind the foundation of the movement in the US are Teresa de Lauretis, film critic from New York, Judith Butler, philosopher from California, Eve Sedgwick, literary critic from the East Coast, so that kind of people. The word has no equivalent, and the entire movement, intellectual and political movement, has absolutely no equivalent whatsoever in France. It does not exist. There's no queer theory or queer studies in France, not in the university, not in books, and not in the general public sphere. And for many reasons. I mean, every form of identity politics, of minority studies, of all those currents and subcurrents born in the US and Canada 30, 40 years ago have never penetrated the French intellectual system. France is very resistant to it, sees a danger, a threat to the unity of the Republic, a sort of cultural fragmentation, or just a silly American object. So for all these reasons, it has not been analyzed, translated, studied. It is now starting with, many decades late, but it is starting in the form of a few books, of a few PhD dissertations in the university. There are a couple of young, very activist lesbian authors in France working on queering the French Republic, which is, to queer the French Republic, you could basically, that would be one way of putting it, sort of generalize the Dominique Strauss-Kahn affair as a pillar of the power system in France, and look at the kind of resistance it triggers, and maybe look at the gay undertones of an obviously very straight and heterosexual affair. That would be, queering the French Republic. Yeah, I've studied over the years the history of intellectual exchange between France and the US. My main work is on French theory, which is this label invented in the US, which is the most successful intellectual movement of the late 20th century, basically, which is the American transformation of people like Michel Foucault, Jacques Derrida, Gilles Deleuze into a sort of conceptual and political bomb, a aimed at, here again, suspecting and threatening the conservative order in America, with identity politics, with literary deconstruction, and the paradox is that all those radical critical movements born in the US, fueled by French authors and philosophers, have not crossed back the Atlantic. And France has resisted those movements for the same reason that they have resisted queer theory, which is really, really weird, because basically those movements have been exported and translated into Germany, Italy, Spain, every important European nation, except in France, where academics are more conservative, where politicians and dominant ideologues are very wary of all this. And so you could say in a way that there hasn't been a sort of feedback effect. I mean, there has been a French influence on America's intellectual sphere 30 years ago, which is still ongoing, and no real movement back, except that it is starting to change as well. Very recently, there have been important translations of American critical theory into French. Some of those leading authors of critical theory in America who have been bred with French theory, people such as Judith Butler, Frederick Jameson, W.J.T. Mitchell. I mean, many people have traveled to France to promote their books and have realized that finally France was opening itself onto this whole thing. It is still quite marginal. There are no university departments to study such things. It won't be in the mainstream media. It will be hard to find a full review of such books in Le Monde or dominant newspapers. But it is starting, belatedly, but it is finally starting. So, in the same way that Americans have said when their soldiers have come to France at the end of World War I to liberate the country, Lafayette, nous voilà. You could say that American intellectuals coming to France now could say, as in sort of address, an homage to Foucault and to Derrida, Jacques and Michel, nous voilà.